Oh my days, oh my days. I don't know if you guys heard the news already, but the format is about to become absolutely stupid. And I mean this in a potentially a positive way if you're an avid blue player, but maybe for others, maybe not. So today they spoiled a bunch of Mystical Archive stuff again, and we got some serious cards, so let's talk about it. So, as you know, a few days ago we got Force of Will, and I talked about pretty extensively how it's going to forever change Timeless. And of course, the implications of having Force of Will in the format means that with cards that snowball, such as Psychic Frog, Ragavan, Tameo, Hydroponics Architect, we'll have a much better time snowballing with cards like Force of Will protecting it. But oh my days, today we got a card spoiled that might actually make the format ever blue, and that is this card called Daze. Today we got Daze spoiled. And with just Force of Will, when it was spoiled, my eyebrow has been raised a little bit. But with Daze into the mix, now I'm a bit concerned. So in Legacy, we got a few cards banned recently, and these include cards like Grief, which was the first card that was banned from the Blue-Black Reanimator, which was also terrorizing the format. And then they saw that the deck was still functioning fine without it. They eventually banned the Entomb, which was actually a part of the format identity for a very long time. And now we turn to Timeless. We currently have everything legal from the Legacy Blue-Black Reanimator bar, some Cyborg cards and Archon of Cruelty. So technically, we could just run this deck in Timeless and it will do absolutely fine. However, I'm not even worried about the Reanimator portion, honestly, at this point. We currently have a problem. We got bigger problems to worry about, and that is this card called Hydroponics Architect. That is going to be the centerpiece in making sure almost nothing will resolve and at the same time filling up your hand with cards. And honestly speaking, Daze and this card should not be allowed in the same format. This is one topic that has been, discussed fair bit here and there in my Discord. The ability to draw a card by fetching an island and letting you bounce that island back into your hand so that you can play again and then draw a card, and then you can bounce it back with Daze again. This is going to become a huge problem that will probably be the first thing Wizard of the Coast, or I don't know who's managing this, maybe like a Magic Arena team, they must address in this format immediately. This is definitely not okay. And I'm sure the first week, we're going to see a lot of this, and people are going to complain about it a lot. So I don't want to get too deep into this, so I'm just going to leave it there. But nonetheless, even though Days might be problematic, I'm still excited about the new powerful cards coming to the format. Just like how I was excited about Strip Mine until I got to play against a Strip Mine for the 1000th time. And it did get stale after that, but it was exciting nonetheless. So that was the first card that we just talked about. So now for some other exciting news that aren't all about blue. We got this another red ritual card called Pyretic Ritual. I think this will probably finalize the mono red storm into a pretty powerful deck now. It's already pretty good so far with the recent addition with Metamorphosis, but now it's going to have Seeding Song, Pyretic Ritual, and a Metamorphosis. So we can see a pretty consistent win from mono red players relatively early now, if no disruption spells comes from the other side, which does make mono red into a pretty scary deck. And at the same time, even with all the counter spells from the other side, mono red recently also got Hexing Squelcher from the Lorraine Eclipse, which you're going to be seeing quite often from now on, now that the format is going to be ever blue. So I feel like the mono red might definitely have some legs, so we'll see how they do. And next up, we got Prismatic Ending. This one's a little bit of a weird one to put it in here since technically it's not new for Timeless or Historic, but if you still haven't crafted this card yet in Timeless, it'll now be downgraded to a rare after the Strixhaven releases. And this is actually pretty important because if you're actually struggling on rare instead of mythic wild cards, you must craft this Prismatic Ending with a mythic wild card before the new set releases. Otherwise, it'll now permanently stay as a rare. So if you still haven't crafted Prismatic Ending, or you're still waiting for that Prismatic Ending to become an uncommon, I feel like you shouldn't wait for it any longer because we just got Prismatic Ending reprint on a Mythic Rare a couple sets back, and then now we're getting it reprinted again. So you're gonna have to wait for a really long time if you're still gonna be waiting for the Prismatic Ending at an uncommon rate. So that's why I decided to put this card here just as a, as a fair warning. So, and next up we got Culling the Weak. So we currently have a very similar card to this in Timeless and even in Historic, which sees barely any plays at the moment, called Sacrifice. This is, in my opinion, definitely a better card in most scenarios, since Sacrifice adds the mana value of the Sacrifice cards, so you had to combo with something like a Grief, but Culling the Weak adds 4 mana regardless of what you sacrifice, so it should be a lot better in my opinion. So that's a very nice addition to the format as well. And now we got a bit of a fun one. We have a card called Armageddon. That's going to be coming to Timeless and potentially Historic. I'm not really sure. The card just says destroy all lands, so you could just play a bunch of Mana Dorks or Chrome Moxes into this. It's probably going to be a bit slow in Timeless. We already have things like Strip Mine, but definitely flashy. It'll probably not be a thing in Historic and be pre-banned just like every other land destruction cards in Historic, since that seems like what they're going for in that format. If it doesn't get banned, I'll 100% be trying out an Armageddon deck in Historic for sure. And here's another fun one, and an archetype defining card too. We finally got Living End in Magic Arena. Now, I don't really see a world where this gets played in Timeless since Reanimate just exists, and that's just way better. But in Historic, this could be a fun build around. We currently have most of the pieces from the modern Living End list in Historic, except Charlotte's Agent, which can be substituted for Violent Outburst, which is a better card here. The only downside here is that in this format, we actually have a lot of Goif decks with Malevolent Rumble running around. So let's say you decide to Living End when opponent has a bunch of cards on opponent's graveyard. That could end up pretty bad for you. Well, luckily, we do have Endurance. That's also legal in Historic, which you probably need 4 of in this deck so that this doesn't happen. But outside of that, we also do not currently have things like the Street Wraith, which is also a pretty nice card to have because you can always just pay life instead of mana to put it into graveyard. Nonetheless, I think this might be a deck in Historic for sure. Will it be good though? Not 100% sure, since the Goif decks are indeed running around. And lastly, for the Mystical Archive, this is another fun build around. We got this card called Ad Nauseam. Now, I'm not 100% sure if we have all the tools needed to build a deck like this in Timeless, but this is actually a pretty decently popular Storm deck in Legacy. Basically, you play this card, and because your deck is a bunch of like ritual effects and like 0 mana artifact that generates mana, you don't lose that much life, and you try to use that mana to play more cards from hand and play things like Tendrils of Agony and win the game. On the flip side, compared to Legacy, this is another card that I talked about in the last video. We got this card called Vampiric Tutor, which was revealed to be in the Mystical Archive. I'm sure there's some shenanigans you can do with this card since you're going to be able to play 4 copies of in Timeless, although they haven't exactly announced anything yet in terms of pre-bans or pre-restriction. But historically, Magic Arena team has not pre-restricted anything so far when it comes to adding new cards. So maybe there could be something here for the Storm players. So that concludes all the Mystical Archive cards for today. So I kind of want to talk about 2 cards that aren't part of the bonus sheet that might have some potential. So we have this card called Petrified Hamlet that was revealed a few days ago. And I talked about this in my Discord, and this is actually a pretty interesting card for the format, since we have like fetch lands and strip mines. This card says when it enters, you choose a land card name, and those lands won't be able to activate the abilities unless they're mana abilities. So this is the first of its kind that has an enter the battle effect trigger for naming a card. I believe no other card puts a stack on naming a card, and I think they purposely did this because since usually spells go on stack, right? So like something like a Pitting Needle, it goes on stack, so you have time to pre-fetch or fetch lands so that you don't get hit by something like a Pithing Needle, for instance. But because this is a land, it has an enter the battle effect trigger so that you can fetch accordingly when this hits the battlefield. Since lands don't have a stack, right? Now, this is actually a pretty big downside because it's a land, since opponent can use a strip mine and then blow up this land as it hits the battlefield. However, because this card is a land, you can actually play this in the lands deck, which means you can crop rotation for this card so that you can potentially land your Dark Depths and then into killing your opponent without having to worry about getting your lands blown up, which is really good. But like I said, the downside is if they're smart, opponent could be holding onto Strip Mine to see what you crop rotation and then, blow up your Petrified Hamlet. So it really does depend on like how many Strip Mines opponent has and how they decide to use it. So that's the first deck. I think you'll probably see Petrified Hamlet in Timeless. But I think there's a second deck that the Petrified Hamlet will probably see play, and that is actually Eldrazi. So Eldrazi actually has a pretty tough time in Timeless because they have a hard time getting their 7 big creatures out using things like Tomb and Temple because it gets blown out all the time from opposing strip mines. But now, if you can get this out early enough, you can shut down things like strip mines, and you can also potentially call Forest. Your Forest can generate colorless mana for your Eldrazi creatures if you play multiple copies of this. And this is also something that the Sowing Myco spawn can grab as well, so that you can safely ramp into your 7 creatures. So I think you'll probably see Eldrazi as well, potentially coming back to Timeless. And the final card we're going to be talking about is Flow State. This is basically Expressive Iteration, except the downside is now gone of having to put one of the cards into exile to be played this turn. And you also don't have to be in red color at all, which is a pretty big upside in my opinion. You do need to have a sorcery and instant speed in the graveyard for this card to be active, but if you build your deck correctly, it shouldn't be a big issue, honestly. You can even play things like Lorien Revealed so that you can cycle it to make sure that you have a sorcery in the graveyard before you cast this thing. And you can even have things like Sink to Stupor as well as part of your land base, which can also get surveilled or potentially milled using cards like Thought Scour. So Thought Scour also becomes a really good card if you pair it with this card. You might not even need it at all, honestly. Another plus here is that you also don't get hit by the Bowmaster, which might be a consideration for the deck. So I think, in my opinion, this card is pretty darn good. So yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a bit of cards here. I'm not sure if I'm going to be doing another one of these videos unless something crazy comes out like Force of Will and Daze. Like I said, I expected Force of Will to potentially come out soon for Timeless, but I didn't expect in the same set we're also going to be getting Daze, which is kind of crazy, honestly. And with that said, will any of these be playable in Timeless except some blue slops with Force of Will and Daze with Reanimate and Tomb Grief? We'll have to see. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye-bye.